Carmelites, one of the oldest religious orders of priests and brothers in the Catholic Church. They date back over 800 years, but continue to draw modern men to their ranks. They are committed to prayer, to community, to action. They are ancient and uncommonly modern. They are the Men of Carmel.
Welcome to a journey to the Carmel.
Journey to Carmel. At 580 meters above sea level, 1,730 feet, the Carmel Mountains tower above the Mediterranean coastline, and their limestone rocks create a cliff-like landscape. It is no wonder, then, that the name Carmel means, in Hebrew, Vineyard of God.
It was on Mount Carmel that Elijah made his stand against the many prophets of Baal and Asherah, who were corrupting the Israelites at the time.
Elijah represents the prophetical tradition of Carmel, and is an inspiration to live in the presence of God, seeking Him in solitude and silence with zeal for God's glory. To stand before the face of the living God is the vocation of all Carmelites. The holy prophet set us an example. He stood before God's face because this was the eternal treasure for whose sake he gave up all earthly goods. His zeal to serve Him tears him apart.
I am filled with jealous zeal for the Lord, the God of hosts.
1 Kings 19:10-14. Later Carmelites have adopted the fiery words of the prophet as the motto of their order. The prophet stands before God like the angels before the eternal throne, awaiting his sign, always ready to serve. He has no other will than the will of his Lord. When God bids, he goes before the king, and fearlessly risks giving him bad news that must arouse his hatred. When God wills it, he leaves the country at the threat of violence, but he also returns at God's command, though the danger has not disappeared.
In the reign of King Ahab of the northern kingdom of Israel 874 to 853 BC, the Israelites apostatized after pagan gods called the bull and Asherah bullskin sword, and left the living God of their ancestors.
The time had come when God must speak to them by means of judgments.
As the Lord God of Israel lives, before whom I stand,
He declared,
there shall not be dew nor rain these years, but according to my word.
True to his words, the nature obeyed the prophet, and the land began to cry for water. The king made diligent inquiry, but the prophet was not to be found. Queen Jezebel, angered over the message that had locked up the treasures of heaven, lost no time in conferring with the priests of Baal, who united with her in cursing the prophet and in defying the wrath of God.
Failing in her efforts against Elijah, Jezebel determined to avenge herself by slaying all the prophets of Jehovah in Israel. Not one should be left alive. The infuriated woman carried out her purpose in the massacre of many of God's servants.
And now, When there was no safety for Elijah in the land of Israel, God sent him to a widow woman in Zarephath to find an asylum in her home.
Through the desolate burned-up country Elijah journeyed, and when he reached the city, he found hunger and misery everywhere. Still he went on, until he saw a poor widow woman, who with weary, bent back was stooping to gather a handful of dried sticks outside her little house. She lifted her head in surprise as Elijah spoke to her.
Fetch me, I pray thee, a little water in a vessel, that I may drink.
He said.
But even in her dire extremity she bore witness to her faith by a compliance with the request of the stranger, who was asking her to share her last morsel with him. Wonderful was the hospitality shown to God's prophet by this Phoenician woman, and wonderfully were her faith and generosity rewarded.
She, and he, and her house did eat many days. And the barrel of meal wasted not, neither did the cruse of oil fail, according to the word of the Lord, which he spoke by Elijah.
And it came to pass after these things, that the son of the woman fell sick, and his sickness was so sore, that there was no breath left in him. And he said unto her,
Give me thy son.
And he took him out of her bosom, and carried him up into a loft, where he abode, and laid him upon his own bed. And he stretched himself upon the child 3 times, and cried unto the Lord. And the Lord heard the voice of Elijah, and the soul of the child came into him again, and he revived.
Through the long years of drought and famine, Elijah prayed earnestly that the hearts of Israel might be turned from idolatry to allegiance to God. And still there was no rain. At last, after many days, the word of the Lord came to Elijah.
Go, show thyself unto Ahab, and I will send rain upon the earth.
In obedience to the command, Elijah went to show himself unto Ahab. Standing before Ahab, Elijah demanded that all Israel be assembled to meet him and the prophets of Baal and Ashtoreth on Mount Carmel.
Send,
He commanded,
and gather to me all Israel unto Mount Carmel, and the prophets of Baal 450, and the prophets of the groves 400, which eat at Jezebel's table.
Carmel overlooked a wide expanse of country. Its heights were visible from many parts of the kingdom of Israel. At the foot of the mount there were vantage points, from which could be seen much of what took place above. Elijah chose this elevation as the most conspicuous place for the display of God's power, and for the vindication of the honor of his name. Facing King Ahab and the false prophets, and surrounded by the assembled hosts of Israel, Elijah stands, the only one who has appeared to vindicate the honor of God. He whom the whole kingdom has charged with its weight